The first thing he noticed was the silence, not the peaceful kind, but the wrong kind. The kind that presses against your ears and tells you something terrible has already happened. The lights in the underground armory flickered once, then steadied, casting long shadows across rows of metal shelves stacked with weapons. At the far end of the room, slumped against a concrete pillar, a woman in a blood-stained police uniform sat motionless, her head tilted unnaturally to one side. Wait, full ligament. And in that moment, as his dog froze beside him with a low instinctive whine, the single father realized this was not just another night of survival. This was a moment that would change everything. Before the story pulls you deeper, take a second. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet heroes who step up when it matters most, please like this video, comment your thoughts, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this remind us why humanity still matters. Why humanity still matters. He had not planned to be there. Nothing in his life was planned anymore. Since his wife's death 3 years earlier, life had become a long list of improvisations stitched together by exhaustion and love. He worked nights as a private security contractor, the kind of job that paid just enough to keep the lights on and food on the table for his young son. During the day, he was a father first, a man running on coffee and determination, trying to be both parents in a world that kept demanding more than he had left to give. That night, the job was simple: escort a shipment through a secured municipal storage facility and leave before dawn. He had brought his dog, a retired military German shepherd trained for search and protection, because the dog was more than a tool. He was family. The dog had been there through sleepless nights, through grief, through the silent moments when the house felt too empty. The dog understood responsibility in a way only another survivor could. Something had felt wrong the moment they entered the lower level. The air was colder, heavier. The dog slowed, ears alert, nose cutting through the space with purpose. That was when they found her. The female officer could not have been much older than him. Her uniform was torn at the shoulder, blood dark and drying across the fabric. One leg was stretched out awkwardly, the other bent beneath her. A shallow rise of her chest told him she was alive, but barely. There was no radio in her hand. No weapon at her side. Whoever had done this had been thorough, and whoever had left her there likely assumed no one would come. For a brief, shameful second, fear took over. He was not a cop. He was not backed up. He was a single dad with a child sleeping at home, depending on him to come back alive. He knew what getting involved could mean: questions, investigations, risk. But then he saw her face more clearly, pale, bruised, breathing shallow and uneven, and the choice disappeared. Some moments do not ask permission, they demand action. He moved quickly, kneeling beside her, checking for responsiveness, assessing injuries with the calm precision drilled into him during years of prior service he rarely spoke about. His dog stayed close, body tense but controlled, eyes scanning the shadows. When the man tried to lift her slightly, she groaned faintly, and that sound cut deeper than any scream. She was still fighting. He knew he could not carry her far alone. He knew he could not leave her. So he did the only thing left. He trusted his dog. With hand signals and low commands, he set the dog into motion, tasking him to find help, to find people, to find light. The dog hesitated only a fraction of a second before sprinting down the corridor, claws echoing against concrete, driven by training and loyalty. The man stayed behind, pressing pressure against wounds, using his jacket as a makeshift bandage, whispering steady reassurances even though she barely seemed aware of him. Minutes stretched into something unbearable. Her breathing faltered, blood soaked through fabric. He adjusted, adapted, fought panic with focus. In those moments, his mind drifted to his son, to the promise he had made at a graveside that he would raise him to be kind, brave, and responsible. He realized then that this was what those words looked like in real life. Not speeches, not medals. Just staying when it would be easier to run. When the dog returned, he was not alone. The sound came first. Boots, voices, flashlights slicing through the dark. The dog burst into the room, barking sharply, weaving between armed officers who followed him at a run. The police froze for a split second at the sight in front of them, one of their own bleeding out on the floor, and an unknown man kneeling beside her with blood on his hands. Tension crackled in the air, thick and dangerous. But before anyone could shout or raise a weapon, the dog positioned himself between the man and the officers, standing alert but not aggressive, a living wall of discipline. The man raised his hand slowly, calmly, never leaving the injured officer's side. His posture said everything words did not. He was not the threat. Medical training kicked in immediately. Paramedics were called. The officer was stabilized enough to be moved. As she was lifted onto a stretcher, one of her hands weakly curled, brushing the man's sleeve. It was barely a gesture, barely conscious, but it felt like a thank you written in pain and survival. The investigation that followed rippled through the department like a shockwave. The injured officer had been ambushed while uncovering internal corruption tied to illegal weapons storage. She had managed to hide critical evidence before being attacked. Evidence that would later dismantle an entire criminal network operating from within trusted walls. If she had died, that evidence would have vanished with her. She lived, and when she woke up days later in a hospital bed, her first clear memory was not the attack. It was the image of a man's exhausted eyes and a dog standing guard in the dark. She asked about them immediately. The police force did not know what to make of the man at first. He avoided attention. He answered questions honestly and briefly. He went home to his son each morning and made breakfast like nothing extraordinary had happened. But officers began to talk about how he had stayed, about how his dog had found help, about how close they had come to losing one of their own. Weeks later, the department invited him to a small ceremony. He almost did not go. He did not feel like a hero. He felt like a father who had done what he hoped someone would do for his child one day, But his son insisted, holding his hand tightly, eyes wide as they walked into a room full of uniforms. The female officer was there, standing now, still healing but alive. When she saw them, her composure broke. Gratitude poured out of her in ways words could barely contain. She credited her life not to protocol or policy, but to compassion. To a stranger who refused to walk away. The police force honored the dog as well, placing a small badge on his harness, a symbol of respect usually reserved for humans. The room erupted in applause, not loud and celebratory, but deep and sincere. The kind of applause that recognizes something rare, but the real change came quietly afterward. An officer helped the man find a more stable job within the department's security operations. Another arranged support for his son's schooling. The community stepped in, not with charity, but with solidarity. Because sometimes when you save one life, you remind an entire system why it exists. Late one evening, months after the incident, the man sat on his porch watching his son play with the dog under the fading light. The world was still hard. Bills still came. Grief still visited. But something had shifted. He no longer felt invisible. He no longer felt alone. He understood now that heroism is not about strength without fear. It is about responsibility despite it, about choosing empathy in moments when no one is watching, about teaching the next generation not through lectures but through action. If this story has touched your heart, if it reminded you that ordinary people can still do extraordinary good, please take a moment to like this video. Share it with someone you care about and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps keep stories like this alive. And before the ending, we have one special request for you. Please comment below with a single word that describes how this story made you feel. Those words matter more than you know, because somewhere right now someone is standing at the edge of a moment just like this one. And maybe, just maybe, your engagement will help this story reach them and remind them to stay. The days after the incident passed quietly for him, but the city around him felt louder, heavier, as if the world knew something he was still trying to understand. News of the wounded officer spread fast inside the department, then outward into the community, though his name was kept out of it at first. He returned to his routine because routine was the only thing that kept his life upright. He packed his son's lunch in the mornings, tied small shoes with clumsy knots, walked him to school with the dog padding along beside them like a silent guardian. At night, when the house finally slept, the weight of what had happened crept back in. He replayed the armory in his mind, the blood, the shallow breathing. The moment when he had almost walked away, and the shame of that near choice lingered longer than the fear ever had. The female officer remained in critical condition for days. Surgeries blurred together. Tubes and machines took over the work her body struggled to do. The doctors were honest in the careful way that doctors are when they know survival is uncertain. And yet, against the odds stacked brutally high, she held on. The dog's instincts, the pressure applied in time, refusal to abandon her when it would have been easier to disappear, all of it mattered. Small decisions had built a bridge between life and death. When she finally stabilized, the internal investigation accelerated. Evidence she had hidden before the attack came to light, and it shook the department to its core. Officers who had worn the same badge for years were suddenly exposed. Trust cracked. Careers ended. Arrests were made quietly without press conferences or celebration. The force was forced to look inward to confront the uncomfortable truth that danger does not always come from the outside. Through it all, the man remained a background figure, answering questions, signing statements, never asking for recognition. He had not stayed for praise. He had stayed because leaving would have haunted him forever. One afternoon, weeks later, a detective knocked on his door. Not with suspicion, but with gratitude. The officer was awake. She was asking for him. She wanted to see the man who had refused to let her die alone on a concrete floor. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and quiet resilience. Sunlight filtered through thin blinds, falling softly across white sheets. She looked smaller than he remembered, fragile but alert, eyes sharp despite everything she had endured. When she saw him, her expression shifted, not to professionalism, but to raw emotion. Tears gathered before she could stop them. She struggled to speak, her voice still weak, but her gratitude filled the room in a way that did not require sound. He stood awkwardly, unsure what to do, until his dog stepped forward and rested his head gently against the side of the bed. She smiled then, really smiled, and reached out with trembling fingers to touch the fur that had brought help racing through the dark. She told him pieces of what had happened, how she had known she was walking into something dangerous, how she had accepted the risk because protecting people was not just a job to her. She told him that when she had felt herself slipping away, she had believed that was it. And then she had heard his voice, calm, steady, human. That voice, she said, had anchored her to the world when everything else was fading. Word spread after that visit. Quiet respect turned into open admiration. Officers stopped him on the street to shake his hand. Some simply nodded, understanding that not all gratitude needs to be spoken. The department made an offer he had never expected. A permanent position, stable hours, benefits, security. Not as a favor, but as recognition of character. He accepted not because of pride, but because stability meant safety for his son. It meant fewer nights of uncertainty. It meant a future that felt less like a cliff edge. The ceremony they eventually held was small, intentionally so. No flashing cameras, no dramatic speeches, just a room filled with people who understood what had almost been lost. When the chief spoke, he did not talk about heroism in abstract terms. He talked about responsibility. About staying when walking away would have been easier, about how one man's decision had saved a life, exposed corruption, and reminded everyone present why the badge was meant to matter. When they honored the dog, pinning a symbolic insignia to his harness, there was laughter through tears, a release of emotion that had been building for weeks. The man watched his son clap with unfiltered pride, small hands striking together enthusiastically, eyes shining as if his father were something out of a storybook. In that moment, he realized that this, not the applause, not the recognition, was the real reward. Teaching by example without ever intending to. Life did not become perfect after that. Grief does not vanish. Trauma does not evaporate. There were still nights when he woke suddenly, heart racing, arm reaching for a past that could not be changed. But there was also healing. Slowly, quietly, in the spaces between ordinary days, the female officer recovered steadily, returning to light duty months later, carrying scars that told a story she would never forget. She and the man crossed paths occasionally, connected by something unspoken but deeply understood. They were not bound by drama or obligation, but by shared survival and respect. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, the man would sit on his porch watching his son throw a ball for the dog as the sun dipped below the horizon. he would think about how close the world had come to breaking in ways that night. Convert. How fragile everything truly is, and how powerful one choice can be. He understood now that heroism does not announce itself. It does not wait for permission. It happens when ordinary people decide that another life matters as much as their own fear. It happens when compassion overrides instinct to protect only oneself, and it leaves ripples far beyond the moment itself. If this story has moved you, if it made you pause and feel something real, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel. Your engagement helps stories like this reach hearts that may be standing at their own crossroads. And before this story ends, we ask you one small but meaningful thing. Please comment below with a word or short sentence describing how this story made you feel. Those comments keep these stories alive and remind others that they are not alone. Because somewhere right now, someone is facing a moment where walking away feels easier than staying. And maybe this story and your voice beneath it will give them the courage to stay.